Welcome to State of the Offense, your unbiased coverage of your favorite team's offense, the Baltimore Ravens. With a team that has as much star power as Baltimore's, I believe that Ravens fans should have very high expectations going into the season. Last year, the Ravens finished 16th in total offense, 28th in passing, 2nd in rushing, and 19th in scoring, which earned them a 10-7 record and a loss in the wild card round of the playoffs. In the skill positions, the Ravens are bringing back all of their main statistical contributors from last season, but they have also added considerably to their wide receiver room by signing Odell Beckham Jr. and Nelson Agholor and drafting Zay Flowers in the first round. Most fantasy football shows will only mention skill players, but at State of the Offense, we look at the entire offensive unit. We start in the trenches by analyzing the condition of the offensive line. On the offensive line, Baltimore is bringing back 4 of their starters from last year. Ronnie Stanley is back at left tackle. He was the Ravens' highest graded offensive lineman with a 91 grade in 11 games played. Stanley's grade was good enough to be tied with Andrew Thomas of the New York Giants as the 6th best left tackle in the NFL. Stanley is under contract through the 2025 season. The left guard position will be open after former starter Ben Powers signed with Denver. The current starter on the ESPN depth chart is third-year player Ben Cleveland, who played in 2 games last year and graded at a 67. Cleveland only had an 8.4% snap share. Former Raider John Simpson is listed as his backup. Simpson appeared in 3 games with Las Vegas and had a 21.5% snap share and a 67 grade as well. Patrick Mekari is listed as the top backup at both left tackle and center for now. But since Mekari is one of the better paid offensive linemen on the team and he has plenty of proven experience, I would expect him to be in the starting 5 eventually. Mekari played in 14 games and graded at a 71 with 34.6% of the snap share. Tyler Linderbaum had a fantastic rookie year as the Ravens starting center. He graded at a 79, played in all 17 games, and had a 99.8% snap share. Linderbaum's 79 grade tied him with Eric McCoy of New Orleans as the 8th best center in the game. Linderbaum's career trajectory appears to be a Pro Bowl future. Kevin Zeitler is back at right guard for his 3rd season as a Raven. Zeitler was the 2nd highest graded Raven offensive lineman with an 84. His 84 grade tied him with Shaq Mason of Tampa Bay as the number 6 right guard in the league. He played in 15 games last season with an 87.3% snap share. Zeitler is in a contract year. Morgan Moses returns for his 2nd season as a Raven at right tackle. Moses played in all 17 games, had a 93.7% snap share, and he graded at a 78. This was good enough to be in the range of the 11 to 13 rated right tackles in the game. Moses is under contract through 2024. The offensive line has historically been a team strength in Baltimore, and this group follows that legacy. The left guard position might not be locked down yet, but 2 of the competitors for the spot have been in the building for a while with Cleveland and Mekari. Kevin Zeitler is in a contract year, so the Ravens may be in the guard market next offseason if things don't work out for them at the position. The contract situation of Lamar Jackson is finally over. Personally, I wish that these things wouldn't be public, but the sports business is very high profile and very publicized. Now the Ravens have their franchise quarterback under contract through 2027. The last 2 years for Lamar Jackson have not measured up to the standard he set in 2019 and 2020. Both 2021 and 2022 were seasons where Jackson only played in 12 games. His touchdown pass totals was in the teens. His completion percentage dropped. He had less yards per attempt, lower quarterback ratings, and less production as a rusher. Here are the numbers so you can see the difference. 24 games played as opposed to 30. A 63.4% completion rate as opposed to 65.2. 33 touchdown passes as opposed to 62. 20 interceptions thrown as opposed to 15. And quarterback ratings around 90 instead of around 100. 1,531 rushing yards as opposed to 2211, 6.2 yards per carry as opposed to 6.6 yards per carry, and 5 touchdowns rushing as opposed to 14 touchdowns rushing. Lamar Jackson is still a dynamic player who can dominate a game, but his drop-off statistically is very noticeable. In fantasy football, is all about the numbers. If you look at Lamar, you have to think that his game doesn't age very well unless he finds the production level as a passer that he had in 2019. In the football media, former offensive coordinator Greg Roman was scapegoated for the Ravens' offensive struggles. You have to remember that Roman was the offensive coordinator when Lamar won his MVP in 2019 as well. Todd Monken is the new offensive coordinator, and he has plenty of success and experience. The Ravens also made a strategic effort as an organization to invest more in the wide receiver position. In fantasy, Lamar Jackson was the quarterback 17 in total points and the 6th quarterback in points per game. Even in a downturn year, Lamar is good enough to put you in championship contention as the quarterback 6 in points per game. Jackson is the 5th quarterback drafted in fantasy drafts, 37th player overall, which means that he's going near the top of the 4th round. Part of the strategy in fantasy is to balance upside and risk. You need guys to produce points at a high level, and you need them to play consistently for as many weeks as possible. Injuries are the main reason fantasy teams don't win championships. We all know who can play. We all have tried the various strategies over the years, and that is why fantasy football is so addictive. Injuries are not predictable in any way, shape, or form, but your odds decrease when you have guys miss multiple games from season to season. If you are one of the quarterback drafters who love going for rushing quarterbacks, you have to think that they are just as likely to get hurt as a running back. And you know that running backs miss games all the time. If you draft any running quarterback, I recommend that you get 2 additional quarterbacks on your roster rather than just 1 additional quarterback. Be prepared for injuries. The roster spot used on a 3rd quarterback helps you more than what a 5th wide receiver, a 2nd tight end, or a 2nd defense or special teams will do for you. Plus, if you have 3 point scoring quarterbacks, it is less likely that one of those guys will take you out in the playoffs from another team. Even in a 4-point passing touchdown league, quarterbacks score tons of points. Hoard quarterbacks who run the ball, and you will have an advantage over the rest of the league. If you only draft a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson and they get hurt, and all you have to depend on is a waiver wire guy like a Ryan Tannehill, you will not win your league. What if you draft Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, and Daniel Jones? You're looking at a 4th rounder, a 7th rounder, and a 10th rounder, respectively. If you know how to manipulate average draft position, you should be able to find values at other positions and stack these types of running quarterbacks. If one of them misses time, you're still good to go with another guy that can score a lot of points. The Ravens made significant changes to the wide receiver position this offseason. Since Rashad Bateman has not been able to stay on the field, the Ravens needed to increase their talent level and depth. Odell Beckham is a talented veteran wide receiver, but you must be aware that Odell hasn't had a 1,000-yard season since 2019. He's only had one 100 reception season in his career. He hasn't scored 10 touchdowns in a season since 2016. Odell was getting drafted as the wide receiver 40 at position 102. Is Odell Beckham worthy of being drafted in this tier? Starting running backs like Brian Robinson and Jamal Williams are getting drafted after Odell. Young wide receivers like George Pickens and Treylon Burks are in his tier. The promise of a starting running back who scored 17 touchdowns last year like Jamal Williams is a lot more appealing to me than a guy who hasn't had a 10 touchdown season since 2016. News was released today about Rashad Bateman's foot injury. He had a cortisone shot, and the Ravens are hopeful that he'll be ready for training camp. Bateman has only played in 19 games over his 2 seasons in the NFL. He's only scored 3 touchdowns in those 19 games. He's still only 23, and he was a recent first-round draft pick, so he does have talent, but in fantasy, no one is drafting him right now. 2023 first-round pick Zay Flowers from Boston College has a nice skill set for a young player. He's very good with the ball in his hands, and he's going to fight for the jump ball. Flowers is the wide receiver 54 drafted at pick 147, which makes him a 13th round pick. I think that he can easily exceed pick 147 production, so I'm a fan of his going into draft season. He has the 8th highest odds for Rookie of the Year on the sports books. Devin Duvernay and Nelson Aguilar are proven NFL players who might get some starts during the season, but they don't offer much in fantasy football otherwise. Tight end Mark Andrews is viewed as the second best tight end in the NFL by many experts. In 2021, he was the tight end 1 over Travis Kelce, but he slipped to tight end 4 in points and tight end 3 in points per game. He is the tight end 2 in average draft position. Andrews was the only Raven to secure over 100 targets last year, so he is a rarity, a tight end who is the number 1 receiving option on his team. I don't expect this to change at all. Lamar Jackson has always thrown to him quite a bit. Also, the new offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, featured the best tight end in college football the last 2 years in Georgia with Brock Bowers. I think that Zay Flowers is going to end up as the main wide receiver option, but I still think that he will not surpass Mark Andrews in the Ravens' passing game pecking order. As the tight end 2, Andrews is the 34th player taken overall, a late third-round pick. He's currently going 18 spots ahead of George Kittle, who was actually better than him last year. There are some starting running backs going in that range that I like Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, and Breece Hall, that are going after Mark Andrews, but ahead of George Kittle. I would probably go for the running back and Kittle myself rather than Andrews and what is getting drafted after Kittle. The Ravens bring back 3 familiar faces at the running back position with J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, and Justice Hill. J.K. Dobbins has had a tough recovery from his knee injury that he suffered in 2021, but there are some reasons to be encouraged by Dobbins' potential. Dobbins played 4 games early in the season last year, where he only averaged 3.5 yards per carry. After an 8-week rehab, Dobbins returned with a vengeance and averaged 7 yards per carry in 4 games near the end of the season. Dobbins has caught only 25 passes in his career, so he's not very valuable in PPR formats. Dobbins is currently the running back 25 drafted at the 74 spot, which would make him a 7th round pick. Dobbins has not been a heavy workload back in his career. He's under 10 carries per game for his career. Part of that reason is the Ravens have split carries evenly between Dobbins and Gus Edwards for Dobbins' entire career. Edwards is not as talented as Dobbins, and Dobbins has been a better fantasy player, but their career workloads are very similar. Dobbins at 9.8 carries per game, Edwards at 9.6 carries per game. Receptions, Dobbins 25, Edwards 18, and this is for their careers. Edwards is not getting drafted until the 15th round as the running back 59. The Baltimore Ravens don't treat J.K. Dobbins like he is 8 rounds better than Gus Edwards, so I question, why should you? Dobbins is probably more deserving of around a 9th round pick, where guys like Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson, and Jamal Williams are getting drafted, and Edwards is probably worth around a 12th round pick. Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews are the only early draftees in fantasy from the Ravens. There are some intriguing names on the roster like Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman, and J.K. Dobbins, but the way Baltimore has traditionally split their workloads at running back and wide receiver, none of them are necessarily worth their draft positions. Lamar Jackson is the key to everything. He is as boom or bust as any player in the NFL from week to week. With the additional receiving options, I'm not as high on Mark Andrews as I have been in the past. The players who I think will outshine their draft positions are Zay Flowers and Gus Edwards. The Ravens organization is one of the most relevant organizations when it comes to winning in the NFL. Unfortunately for fantasy football players, it limits their overall fantasy football points. The Ravens are as solid as any team in the league, though, and their ceiling is always the Super Bowl. Their floor is usually a team that barely misses the playoffs. As they do every year, the Ravens will have something to say in the conversation about who the best team is in the AFC. If you like today's coverage of the Baltimore Ravens offense, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.